Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Yat everyone. She'e Heather Fleming Nishia, and I'm a member of the Navajo Nation and also the executive director at Change Labs in Tuba City. Bit'ane Nishle, Bilagana Bashish Chin, Torachini Deshiche, Bilagana Deshanella. And welcome to the first webinar in a 4-part series on doing business on the Navajo Nation. Today's session is titled Starting a Business on the Navajo Nation, the Data versus the Reality. And today's session is being hosted by Change Labs in Tuba. Change Labs is an entrepreneurship support organization based on the Navajo and Hopi Nations. And I'm just going to quickly use this opportunity to share with you a little bit more about what we do. More specifically, we're in the business of providing workspace, tools, resources, and knowledge for Native American entrepreneurs. We have 5 programs that we use to support our local community members and local entrepreneurs, artists, and vendors. We have a design residency program. We offer co-working space. We have a business incubator. You'll learn much more about what we're doing on in the Doing Business program today. And then we have a micro loan program called Kinship Lending. I just wanted to quickly step you through 3 of these programs in case any of them might be helpful to any of you on this call who run a business or are thinking about starting a business in the coming months. Our resident designer program is we select 1 Native artist each year to work with the Change Labs teams, and we in turn have them work one-on-one with community members to help them build new websites or help them create new marketing materials. In the photograph here, you see one of our fabulous graphic designers in our network, Duran Washburn of Debenitsa Creative in Upper Fruitland, working with one of the entrepreneurs in our community, Tyrone Thompson of Gigi Farms. In terms of workspace, you can come and visit our co-working studio in Tuba City. There you can use a desk, you can access Wi-Fi, get some printing done. We have a few marketing tools there like button makers and Cricut machines. And my colleague Marcia Greyeyes, who's on this call, is there every day, well, Monday through Friday, from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. Navajo time. And for those of you who are thinking about starting a business or have just started a business, you might want to take a look at the Change Labs Business Incubator. Each year, we select 20 high potential Native entrepreneurs to enroll in this 1-year program. And in exchange, you get a business coach assigned to you to help you navigate what it takes to start a business on Navajo. You get access to our microloan program, and you also get a plethora of training and coaching with the Change Labs team.
How to do business within the, sorry.
Yes, if everybody could mute, that would be great, or I will come in and I'll force mute you. All right, so looking at today's agenda, this is only a 90-minute session, and with some of these topics, that's not going to be enough time, but we're going to do the best that we can. This morning, or this afternoon, I guess now, we're going to kick off with the data and the findings and the recommendations that came out of that. And there'll be time at the end of that presentation for our audience to ask a few quick questions about maybe how the research was conducted or ask any clarifying questions about our recommendations. But then I'm going to quickly move us on to a moderated discussion with 2 guest Navajo entrepreneurs that we have with us today, Mr. Verning Livingston and Ms. Candice Mendez. And we hope also to be joined today by Mr. Ryan Holgate from Navajo Nation Business Regulatory. All of these folks are going to have the opportunity to share their own stories of what it took for them to start a business. Mr. Holgate can hopefully speak to what's going on within business regulatory and thinking about how to expedite and streamline some of these processes. And then we'll end today's discussion with input from this community. Any comments or stories that you have to share about the process of registering or certifying a business on the Navajo Nation. And I mentioned in the beginning that this is just the first of a 4-part series. If you are interested in what you learned today, next week we're going to be talking specifically about streamlining the business site lease process. So moving from registration and certification to how do you access land, electricity, and navigate construction on Navajo Nation. The week after that, September 1, we're going to be looking at the credit environment and asking the question, what could a Navajo banking system look like? And then our final webinar on September 8th is going to look at operations and growth. What does it take to grow a business on the Navajo Nation, and what are some of the hurdles there? I hope you all can join us for that. I can provide a link to register for some of these events in the chat window shortly. And before I hand it over to my colleagues, Hannah and Raymar at Causal Design, I also just wanted to quickly note that given the title of this webinar, I expect that some of you maybe joined today because you wanted to learn how to register or certify a business on Navajo, and that's awesome. So in the chat window, I'm also going to put a link to Build Navajo, which is buildnavajo.org. It's a free resource that Change Labs has created that helps answer questions about how you register your business, how you certify your business. You can download all the forms there. It has all the contact information for your local RBDO, Business Regulatory, and the Division of Economic Development on Navajo. So if any of you came today hoping to get that information, I will be sure to put it in the chat window. And now I'm going to hand it over to Hannah Pruitt of Causal Design, who is, I'm going to hand it over to Raymar at Causal Design, who is going to step us through an introduction to Causal, and then Hannah will lead us through some of the data and the research.
Thanks so much, Heather. This should be fairly quick on my end. So my name is Raymar Macaranis. I'm one of the co-founders of Causal Design. And we're primarily a research firm that conducts economic and impact analysis to help organizations like Change Labs improve the lives of members in their community. For the past several years now, we've supported Change Labs and their team in setting up systems to both measure and understand their impact on the small business community on the Navajo Nation. The research that we'll be talking about today focuses on different dimensions of the business environment on the nation and helps us understand kind of what the current state of the world looks like in terms of being able to run and support a business. The research itself is part of a larger kind of multi-year effort to help Change Labs understand really where they can best help entrepreneurs navigate the process and where to support them at key points. My colleague, Hannah Pruitt, who Heather mentioned, who led the study and really deserves a lot of the credit for her hard work collecting the data, knocking on doors, making phone calls. She'll talk about the specific findings of the report and some of the recommendations that we have from that. And so, with that, I'll go ahead and hand it off to her.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for that, Raymar. So I've been with Causal Design for the past year working on this project, but it really got started long before my time with Causal or working with Change Labs. Change Labs has been working directly with entrepreneurs for the past 5 to 6 years on Navajo Nation, and throughout their time, they've collected a lot of stories about what entrepreneurs really, what challenges they experience trying to start and grow a business. And after collecting a lot of these anecdotes, it led them to ask the question, what really makes doing business on Navajo so difficult? And so they brought this research question to us, and we decided to try to answer it with a methodology that we call doing business. Doing business was piloted by the World Bank. It's been done annually for the past 20 years or so in over 190 countries around the world. But at its core, it's really a tool to try to understand all the different factors that someone would need to consider whenever they're deciding to start, grow, and operate a business. So what exactly it measures is it takes a hypothetical business. So it creates a case study business that it then moves through all of these processes that are related to starting and growing a business. So it starts with what we're going to talk about today, opening a business. And it says this entrepreneur wants to start a business. What steps does she need to go through in order to formally register, in order to set up their tax accounts, all of these things. And then we also added a Navajo specific indicator about certifying a business, the business certification process here. And then, as Heather mentioned, in our later webinars, we'll talk about some of the other parts of the research which look at the process for getting a spot to do business. That's accessing land, dealing with construction permits if you want to build a structure to do business, and getting that connected to electricity. And then it moves into, if you want to grow your business, what does the credit environment look like, and how can you access finance? And then the last stage is looking at the process for completing day-to-day operations like paying your taxes, and how can you be sure that you're operating in a secure environment. If you have a contract out, are you able to enforce it? And that's what that last indicator looks at. And we think that, and at each steps of these, or each of these 8 different indicator sets, it measures 4 different dimensions. So the first one is looking at complexity, or how many different procedures or steps do you need to go through in order to start your business or to certify your business. It also looks at how time intensive it might be, or how many days do you have to invest in order to get these processes done. It also looks at the cost component, how much do you have to pay in fees or permits in order to do these things. And then it also has an aspect about the quality of regulation. So we're really trying to measure, does the business environment have these regulations that we know support businesses and make it easier to do business. And building all these things together, we think really create the business environment or the ecosystem that a business operates within. And today, as I've mentioned, we're just going to focus on that first aspect of opening a business. So we definitely wanted to look at these processes on Navajo, but we thought where we're really going to gain the most knowledge is trying to compare it to an off Navajo business as well. So if you have the same exact business and they're trying to start a business or get registered into the city in Shiprock, how do their experiences differ than the same business trying to do that in Cortez? So what did we find? Starting a business, we found that the process actually takes a similar amount of steps. It's not necessarily more complex on Navajo compared to in Cortez to register your business or sign up for the different tax accounts that you might need to get started. Despite a similar number of steps, though, it does take on average 7 times as long on Navajo as compared to Cortez. And along with that, it also takes, it's about 2 to 3 times more expensive to start your business on Navajo compared to Cortez. So to put this into perspective and really show what this means, say we have 2 of the exact same businesses. We have Nick on the left, who operates a screen printing shop in Shiprock, and then we have another entrepreneur on the right who is in Cortez and also opens a screen printing shop. And on the first day of them wanting to start their screen printing business, they both apply for a federal tax ID number. It's done online. They're usually able to get through the application in a day. And then on day 2, they move to, Nick goes to formally incorporate with Navajo Business Regulatory, whereas the Cortez entrepreneur is able to register with the Colorado Secretary of State and apply for his tax withholding account in 1 day. This is mostly because these processes are both done online in Cortez, whereas Nick in Shiprock has to drive over to Window Rock to drop off his paperwork or mail it in. On day 3, the Cortez entrepreneur is able to set up his tax accounts, both with the state and the city, while Nick is still waiting for business regulatory to process his articles of incorporation. On day 4, the Cortez entrepreneur sets up his unemployment account and arranges for workers' comp. And on day 5, the Cortez entrepreneur is able to begin earning revenue while Nick is still waiting for business regulatory to process his articles. And this continues for a couple more days, day 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, until on day 12, Nick is able to, he gets his articles formally incorporated, he goes to the Navajo Tax Authority and files to create his tax account in person or mails it in. And at this point, the Navajo entrepreneur already has 8 days of revenue generation under his belt. And he continues to generate that revenue as Nick moves through the different steps of the process. He registers with New Mexico. On day 14, he's able to set up his unemployment tax insurance account. And on day 15, he arranges for workers' comp. And finally, on day 16, he earns his first day of revenue. At this point, the Cortez entrepreneur has already earned 12 days of revenue. And so according to QuickBooks, the average daily revenue of a US business is $120 per day. And so if you extrapolate that out into the Navajo comparison, by the time Nick makes his first $120, the Cortez entrepreneur has already earned over $1,400. So bringing it back to those findings, you know, this is just the experience of one entrepreneur, but it really can multiply out. And so that really puts a loss cost on that 7 times as long. And we can see how, you know, that's why we hear so many stories about people maybe going to locate in border towns or in other areas where they're just able to get things done a little bit more quickly. If we move on to looking at the certification process, there's not a perfect comparison of this in the Cortez context. It is a Navajo-specific process, but looking at it in the same way, we find that it is actually a pretty straightforward and inexpensive process. There's a marginal fee, and you really just have to drop off one piece of paperwork at business regulatory. But once it gets to regulatory, it goes through 5 different procurement clearances or different offices. And while processing time is supposed to be 2 weeks, we can see that a lot of times holdups at these various offices might report or result in longer processing times. So if we have Nick again, and he wants to certify his business as a Navajo or Native-owned business, on day 1, he notarizes his financial statement, and then he drives over to Window Rock and drops off his application materials with business regulatory. The next day, business regulatory takes a look at it, makes sure that he has submitted everything that he needs to, and then they move it through the procurement clearance process where his application is reviewed by 5 different groups to make sure that he is in good standing with Navajo Nation. And it's shuffled internally, and then finally within 2 weeks, it should be returned to him as a Navajo certified business. You know, as we see, this process requires moving his application through 5 different tribal government offices. And whenever you have 5 different touch points, it leaves a lot of opportunity for various holdups to affect the process. And from our anecdotal evidence and our conversations with entrepreneurs, we find that that really does lead to delays, often sometimes being longer than 2 weeks. And so to summarize, we collected all this data and benchmarked these processes, and we found what might be the pain points or where there might be gains. And we took all of that to create our recommendations. And we categorized our recommendations kind of into 2 different spectrums. We looked at both the short term, so what we think Change Labs or other entrepreneurship support agencies could do tomorrow or next week to try to help these 2 processes along and support Navajo entrepreneurs. And then we look at what might be some more longer term strategic goals. So in the short term, as Heather has already plugged, they have this great resource called Build Navajo, where they really walk through all the different processes that you might need to do to start your business. And we suggest that they continue to build, update, and promote this as a resource for Navajo entrepreneurs. Additionally, it could also serve as a hub where any entrepreneur can go to download their forms and provide guidance on where and when to file them. And in the longer term, we think that Build Navajo could become even more resourceful or even more of a central business portal. As you saw whenever we walked through Nick and the Cortez entrepreneur through the business registration process, the Cortez entrepreneur was able to get a lot of things done in a shorter amount of time. And a lot of that is because everything is done through a central business online portal where you file all your paperwork, you register for all your tax accounts. And we really envision that being something that could make doing business on Navajo a much easier thing. So with that, I think that concludes my presentation, and I'd love to open it up to any questions for you guys.
We have time maybe for one or two, maybe three questions from the general audience. If you guys wanted to ask any questions about the data or how it was collected or these recommendations before we move on to our discussion with Vernon and Candace.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hi, yes.
I have a question when it comes to certifying a Navajo business. So does that change if it's an S Corp, or I guess more shares are divided for multiple individuals? I guess, would there be a certain amount of percentage of how many Navajos compared to non-Navajos would be in that business structure?
I'm not sure if the analysis went into depth about the different structures. I'm not sure if Ryan Holgate joined, and he might be able to answer that question as someone that processes these. But from my understanding, it seemed to be a pretty standardized process across the different business structures.
I just want to say, if there's specific questions about business registration or certification, I also just posted in the chat window a resource for all of you, buildnavajo.org. And of course, you can also visit your local RBDO. Most of the economic development specialists there can answer questions that you have about business registration.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
So out of the data that you just shared with us, it sounds like it's not really that difficult to actually get licensed as a Navajo entity. But what, from like answering the question that was brought to you before when you started this research, what makes it difficult? Is it that we give up too easy, or is it the cost? Have you found any of that out?
Sure, yeah. So I think this is a question where, as we move through all 4 different parts of the series, you'll see us presenting each indicator set that I showed you that really builds into that entire picture of the business environment. And the goal of the research is to look at each of these pieces individually to try to decide which one might be posing the biggest challenge or barrier to doing business on Navajo. And while we identified that it does take longer to complete some of the processes that we talked about today, a lot of the discussion about what makes it so difficult in the broader sense, I think we might touch on next week when we look at how difficult and complex and long it takes to access land and getting electricity were 2 of the probably more major findings of the report.
Okay, thank you. So it sounds more like maybe an infrastructure thing.
Yeah, I think so.
Right.
And Raymar, feel free to join in.
Yeah, no, just a quick comment, and in that, we're looking at one step in an entire ecosystem process that is really, it's interconnected in a lot of ways, right? So while one step might be a little bit easier, you'll already begin to see how by, requiring lots of different touch points, requiring lots of, wait times, you may make other processes more difficult to reach kind of later on in the steps. And so as we look at each different kind of dimension of doing business, um, they begin to add up and potentially affect one another, right? So in order to complete step 6 down the road, you may need things that you might still be waiting on from earlier stages. And so what it does is it creates sort of this this extra potential burden that an entrepreneur has to carry along as they're trying to get all their pieces together. And so that's really kind of the through line that's going to go through all of these webinars, is understanding, okay, there are small pieces here and there are certainly some steps are a lot harder, but overall, the ecosystem also has kind of its own issues and things that should be addressed as a whole.
Okay, yeah, I understand that. Thank you.
So to
Yeah,
that
thank you.
point, we thought it was important to contrast some of the findings with the lived realities of Navajo entrepreneurs, because to the point of the people who've asked questions, that timeline that Hannah shared, trying to remember what it was now, the 16 or 18-day timeline to register your business, in reality, it often takes longer than that. And I am happy to share that when Change Labs went to register as a domestic nonprofit on the Navajo Nation, our application was sitting in business regulatory for 60 days before we decided to pull it and register in the state of Arizona instead. And now we're going to the steps to register as a foreign nonprofit on Navajo Nation. So we ourselves have had that experience. And we've invited a few guests today to join us to share their experience with both registration and certification. So I want to take this time to introduce you all to our two guest speakers. We have Candice Mendez of Salt VMO and Vernon Livingston of Navajo Technology Services joining us today. And I just quickly want to see, was Mr. Ryan Holgate of Business Regulatory, was he able to join this call? I'm just putting a call out there in case he's there.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right.
Wonderful. All right. And we also have Ryan Holgate from Business Regulatory joining us today. So thanks to the three of them for joining us and for sharing their experience and their expertise. Really quickly, Candice is running an event planning company. Vernon is offering IT services. Both of them are serving both on and off reservation customers. Both of them are currently registered with the Navajo Nation. Vernon is also certified as a Navajo-owned business, and Candice is just about to step through that process for herself. So I want to start with the two entrepreneurs, Candice and Vernon. Specifically, I hope they could start by sharing their own experience with registering a business on Navajo. And Candice, if I could call on you first, what was your experience like?
Sure, thank you for the introduction, Heather. Yad e everyone out there, Shea, Candice Mendez, and Shia, Ashin Zon de Berlin, Bashin do Tritni, the Chanel, Twotsuni, the Che. So hello to all the relatives out there. So my experience with the Navajo Department of Economic Development Office was an all-day affair, and it's really funny to tell it now, but it is an all-day thing, which is what I asked around to other Navajo businesses that had registered their business at the DED office, and they were like, just show up early and expect to be there all day. And so I came prepared. I did my research online. I downloaded their appropriate paperwork to apply for an LLC, and went to Bashes and got my money order. It's not expensive, so that's not an issue. I believe it's $20. But this was 3 years ago, so my memory may not be correct. I had all my documents. I went into the office, was pointed to the direction where I was supposed to go. No one was really in the cubicle spaces, so I grabbed a ticket and waited for about 30 to 45 minutes for someone to acknowledge me, until someone came in the office and they were like, "What are you doing here?" I was like holding a yellow ticket and being like, "I'm here to register my business as an LLC." And then they just pointed me to a lady in an office literally next to the chair I was sitting at. So the whole time she's sitting to the right of me, and I'm sitting here with paperwork for like 45 minutes. So I went in probably like around 9 o'clock in the morning. And then she was really nice. I sat down with her and I told her what I wanted to do here. And then I showed her my paperwork and I had all my documents there. And then she said I had the incorrect paperwork. And so then she pointed to a lateral wall file holder outside her office that had about 11 folders in them, all with applications in them that weren't labeled, or you didn't really know which one was what. So I asked her, okay, well, if it's not the correct LLC paperwork, which application is on this wall? And then so she got up and showed me the correct application. And then so I just sat down and just filled it out with a pen and paper, old school style, because I wanted to get it done that day. So I returned it back to her and she looked at it and we were talking about what my business was. And then she said, "Oh, you want an LLC? Well, this is the wrong one. You need to fill out this one." So she handed me another application off of that same wall file holder. And so filled out the correct paperwork and filled it out, did what I need to do. I already had my template for all my articles of incorporation and articles of organization ready. And so I handed them back to her. Luckily, I was the only one in the office, and I just went, by then we're besties because we've been there for like 2 hours. So we go back and forth, and so I handed her the paperwork, and she said, "Oh, you have the wrong template for the articles of organization. You have to use this template," which was not in the instructions. So I went back and I redid my articles of organization on my laptop, which I brought with me. And I was just thinking in my head, I was like, oh my gosh, I have to probably go find a printer now. I probably have to go to Bash's in Winter Rock or someone, maybe even Gallup, to go back to print this out because it's not correct. By chance and by luck, I had a friend there. I'm not gonna name her on this webinar, but she just happened to be renting a cubicle space in that same area. And she said, "I recognized your voice. I thought you were in here." And luckily she had a printer. And so because the internet is so bad in that office and just on Navajo in general, we had to transfer files with a USB file. And luckily she had one because I didn't. I was still living in Phoenix and just totally took my high-speed internet for granted. So there we were sitting in her cubicle, laptop side by side, and we transferred our files through a USB memory disk. And so she printed it out, and I was so thankful. To this day, I'm so thankful she was there because she helped me through the process and also to calm me down too, because at this point I was livid. Went back to the office with the DED lady, and she looked at it and she said, "This is incorrect." I said, "Okay." And so she just crossed out something, and I went back to the cubicle where my friend was, and we luckily did the same thing. I corrected it, did everything, printed it, went back to the office, which is literally probably 15 steps from where that cubicle was. And then she said, "This is wrong." And I was like, okay, well, so that went for about 3 or 4 more times because she wouldn't correct the whole entire file. So she would just circle one thing that was wrong. And it wasn't like it was a typo. It wasn't like it was something that was missing. It was just something very procedural that wasn't in the instructions. And I would have never known unless she was there to correct it for me. But the thing was, she wouldn't look through my entire application, so I could just correct it in one go because I was like, listen, I don't even have a printer here. So she wouldn't look at the whole thing. So I would go back to her 3 or 4 different times with 3 different versions. And like, it was like being an elementary school teacher. She just correct it, come back with things like, "Oh, this needs to be corrected." And I'm just like, and I was like, you know what? I cannot argue right now. I want to get this done. So as soon as I got everything all done, and I was so proud of myself, went back, and she's like, "Well, now I got to go on lunch." So it was lunchtime. And so my mom and I sat in the waiting room for about 2 hours waiting for this lunchtime to be over. went back, she sat back down, and then we finished the paperwork, and she filed it and did everything. And by then it was around 3:30. And she was like, okay, well, you're gonna have to take this over to this another office to get it registered. And I was like, okay. And she's like, it's the office right over there. She didn't tell me where it was. And she was like, it's just down the hall. It's right over there. So I had to be like, can you please walk me to the office, because I don't know where this office is. It's not labeled. You didn't tell me a name. So she walked me to the office, and she's like, oh, this guy's out to lunch. And it was 3:30. She's like, he should be back any time now. So we waited longer in the office, in the waiting room, for this person to come back and certify my paperwork. He never came back. This guy never came back. And it was like 4 o'clock or 5:30 by then. And so luckily, the lady who helped me with the DED this whole time was nice enough to say, you know what, you've been here all day. You can just fill out your paperwork here, and I'll just give it to him, and he can certify it, and I'll submit it for you. And by then I was like, thank you so much, because I didn't want to drive to Window Rock. I'm from Western Agency, so it takes about 2 hours to drive to Window Rock, and I didn't want to go back there again. And so, at the time I was living in Phoenix, and my intention was to move back to Navajo at the time. So we finally ended up leaving there near tears, because I was so frustrated with the process. And I knew I couldn't really complain to anybody, because no one seemed to care about the process. No one seemed to really care that I was going through this, except for my friend who was in the cubicle, who, was able to calm me down and say, this is just how things are here. And also I met a friend outside of the office, and she goes, that's the way it is. She's like, I'm registered with the state of Arizona, because I don't even want to deal with Navajo. And so after all that, finally submitted my paperwork, and I got my license back a month later in the mail. And so I was glad of it, but I'm gonna have to take a day off to go back to the office to recertify, and also get Navajo preference too. So yeah, it is a process, and you do have to really just stick through it, do problem solving, and lots and lots of patience is what it takes.
Thank you, Candace. Thank you for sharing that. Vernon, I want to go over to you now. What was your experience like? And you also went through certification, so if you can touch on both.
Hey, can you guys hear me okay? Okay, sounds good. Okay, so let me just introduce myself real quick. My name is Vernon Livingston, Winagasi Nishnido, Keani Bushishchin, Dashachedo, Nahabani, Dashanella. My family comes from the Dalcon area, so I'm familiar with the Western Agency. Also, my business is out of Fort Defiance, Arizona. That's where it's registered. The name of my business is Navajo Technology Services, LLC. I am the first technology managed service provider on the Navajo Nation. I provide resale hardware procurement around technology like PPE, transportation technology like command center vehicles, information technology, computer servers and laptops. I provide telecommunication technology services such as voice over IP. I also help and assist with towers and point-to-point devices across the Navajo Nation. I provide services to all 50 states, and I'm available to all 500 plus tribes across the nation. So kind of have a real broad horizon for my business. I provide consulting services as well. I sell assessments. That's my main business, to come in and to any organization and say, well, what kind of equipment do you need? And I try to sell them an assessment, and from there, I get the ball rolling. And most of it's around technology related projects. I provide SharePoint sites, computer imaging, computer equipment installation, broadband plan development, risk management plans, IT governance plans, and of course, disaster recovery planning as a service. So that's how my business is established. And just to answer the question about registering a business as on Navajo, the difficulty level from 1 to 10, I say, is about a 9. The process was to try to get registered with the Navajo Nation. At first, I was turned down. The biggest issue I had was invalid addressing. I had to change my address on my driver's license to a physical address. I then changed my voter registration with the county, so I had to go to the Apache County and get that verified. Also had to change my address on my bank statements. So that way, when they asked for either utility statement or bank statement, I would have that on my bank account. So I can easily show that as my physical address. So the problem with everything was I couldn't use a PO box, and that's how the whole Navajo Nation is organized, through PO boxes. And just to be able to think outside the box on how to get registered with a physical address was the toughest part. I was then able to go online. Of course, I couldn't register still with the Navajo Nation, so I actually registered with the Arizona Commission Corporation and the Secretary of State for Arizona. I had to put my business information, articles of incorporation in the Navajo Times, which is only printed once a week. So I had to wait 3 weeks for that to pass. I was finally able to get all the documents that I needed to Navajo Nation Business Regulatory to meet their guidelines. I then had to request to become an LLC, but because I was registered with the state of Arizona, I actually am registered now with the Navajo Nation as a foreign entity. And that was kind of what I wasn't trying to accomplish. So, but in my case, I had to go the long route. It took me at least 3 to 6 months just to get everything organized. And in doing so, I was also able to get TPT license tax exemption for the state of Arizona for the hardware procurement side of my business. So certifying as a Navajo-owned business again, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the hardest, it was a 9. The certification itself took about 2 months. I'm lucky, I live in Window Rock. I could go and check out my documents on a daily basis. When there was a request for notarized documents, I was able to turn it around in 1 or 2 days, whereas I know that people that live off the reservation, they had to make a trip out here just to get the proper documentation, and then of course the proper language to fulfilling those obligations. And the main thing was just getting that verified reservation address from DCD as well. I had to go in and submit my application. That itself took about a month just to get a verified rural address from DCD, Community Development, and then of course from the local chapter house to get that notarized to the chapter and to say that this is where I live at and this is where I plan on doing my business. So rural addressing was one of the major factors, and as of right now, with the United States Postal Services, my address is still not valid, but I guess we can get to that later in our discussion. So that was what it took for me to register my business. There was a lot of work, a lot of follow-up. Like I said, I was lucky. I'm local to Window Rock, so I was able to go to the office on a pretty much daily basis and check and call and make sure my paperwork was getting approved. I know I ran into a lot of issues. Had to work with Ryan Holgate and the NBRO in Window Rock. So that's my story.
Thank you, Vernon. So both of you, especially Vernon, touched on this topic of legitimacy. And this is actually a question that we get a lot at Change Labs, particularly people who are wanting to know, should they register with Navajo? Is it better to register with the US state that they're operating in? If they register on Navajo, would they still be considered a legitimate business? We get that question a lot. And both of you have shared challenges when it comes to physical business addresses and versus your res-based addresses, and whether or not, or how that makes it more difficult for you to do business. One of you had previously told me about an experience with SAM.gov and trying to register for federal contracts. Would you both mind sharing a little bit about, and Candace, I'm going to start with you first, again, if you have a story to share about this idea of legitimacy and registering with Navajo.
Thank you. I think the hardest part is the physical address, because we don't have numbered addresses on the Navajo reservation. So everything is a physical, and it's basically directions to your house. And that can be very long. And so that's the biggest thing, is that usually people are like, yeah, but where do you live? Like, do you have a street number, about where your physical address? And they don't understand that. So that's the hard part about telling them, like, hey, listen, you're literally giving them instructions about where you live, and they just don't recognize it. And so they think I'm making it up. So like saying that, I think that's probably the biggest burden, because the systems don't recognize it, whatever system you're trying to register your business at. The biggest problem I had was with, like, an example would be SAMS.gov. When I was trying to register my business on the government procurement website, the text box wouldn't allow me to fit my entire physical address in there. And then when I tried to abbreviate it, which looked crazy too, it wouldn't recognize it. So then at the time, my PTAC representative was Mabel Sosi. So she helped me get on the phone, and we had to go through a gigantic phone tree. The first representative we got on the helpline didn't understand what tribal businesses meant. So luckily I was there with Mabel, and she was able to walk me through, and she's like, listen, and she had to be aggressive. She had to tell the helpline, like, listen, that we need a tribal representative. And she insisted, and I didn't know we had to do that. So I was really thankful that I had Mabel there to help me and say, listen, you have to really ask for someone that knows tribal businesses to help you push your application through. So that was one thing. It didn't recognize my business address. Also, when you try to apply for credit. So I do event planning, and a lot of the times I need to apply for credit to be on an invoicing basis, because you need to pay for food and beverage, you need to pay for AV, you need to pay for tents and those kind of things. And those vendors, they either want you to do a deposit, which can be like $20,000, or they need you to do an invoice process. And so with my business, I have to fill out a credit form so they can trust me to pay them once the invoice comes in. And a lot of the times they ask for physical address. And so when they see my physical address, they think I'm making it up. They're like, this can't be real. So of course my application looks crazy. It doesn't look legitimate, and I get denied my credit for invoicing. Also, my Navajo tax number is not found in any database. So the biggest problem I had with that was banks. Before that, again, I did my research. I went to all the Native American trade shows and conferences looking for banks that do businesses with Native American businesses. And I asked all of them, they're like, yeah, come by. Here's my card. Yeah, we can totally open you up. We can definitely open up your business. And I was like, yeah, but I have a Navajo tax ID. Can you guys do that? They're like, yeah. So when it was time for me, I finally got my first check. I was dead broke, so poor. I was afraid I wouldn't pay for my rent or even buy groceries. And I had this big old fat check walking around, and I took it from bank to bank to bank. I went and pulled out all my business cards that I collected, and I went from bank to bank to bank, and I felt like Pretty Woman, and I was like, listen, I got money to spend in here. Like, how come no one wants to grab my check? And because none of them would recognize my Navajo tax ID to open a bank account. And I was really frustrated because they had all told me they do business with tribal businesses, which they didn't. And so I was at the end of my rope, and I finally thought about Wells Fargo. I was like, you know what? They have a Wells Fargo in Window Rock, so they have to have that Wells Fargo must open up Navajo businesses, and they have to accept Navajo tax IDs. So I went to the Wells Fargo in Phoenix, and sat down with a banker there, and ended up he was Navajo, and we did the same people. I was like, perfect. I'm glad you're Navajo. We know the same people. Let's open up his bank account so I can cash a check and buy groceries and pay my rent. And then so he went. He's like, yeah, we can do it. He was so confident. And then he got to entering my tax ID, and he was like, that's weird. I don't see it anywhere here in the database. And I was like, yeah, because it's a Navajo tax ID. You just have to push it through. And then so he goes, I can't do it. It won't let me. He just was like at the dead end. And so at that point, I was near tears because I was like, I cannot believe this is happening. I need to cash this check because I don't have any money. So I called up the Window Rock Wells Fargo, and I just said, listen, I have a teller here at the Phoenix Wells Fargo, and he doesn't know how to enter the tax ID for this, complete my application, open a business account. And so the teller just said, hand the phone to him, and he walked him through the process. And it was just as simple as just entering the number and pressing enter. And that was it. It accepted it. So there's that mental block of the people doing your application is that they don't recognize it, so they don't think it's legitimate and they don't want to do it. And not to mention, it's not in any database. So it's just, you know, you have to go through these humps, and you do have to do a lot of problem solving, and you just have to keep pushing through and insist on, you know, the legitimacy. And a lot of times, like for Facebook, I had to scan and send them my Navajo business license, so they would open up my Facebook business account. So there's just those things. But if you have all your paperwork in order and you have the patience, you can do it.
Still a lot to ask of any entrepreneur. I mean, you've got other stuff to do to run your business. So thank you for sharing that. Vernon, do you have any similar stories?
Yes, I do. Legitimacy as a business to the outside world for the Navajo small businesses that are out there. I mean, the first thing is you always want to get registered with different organizations, whether you want to be a partner or you want to be able to provide contracts to these partners, whether it's the government or private or public entities. And for myself, I was able to legitimize my business. I got all the documentation. I'm registered with SAM.gov. I got my DUNS, my NACE codes. Even though I have all of these documents, the one issue I am having right now, and this kind of defeats the idea of having the legitimacy behind the documentation, is that when I reach out to partners such as Apple, HP, Dell for hardware procurement and partnership for reselling, all of them have turned me down so far. So, but there's always a back door for everything, and I'm able to partner with diverse companies that are out there that have partnerships with these other companies, and that's kind of how I get around a lot of these closed doors when it comes to the legitimacy of my address and the way my business is set up on the Navajo Nation. I think depending on what type of services you provide, it's probably going to be a little more difficult if you don't have any contingency plans. But that's probably one of the big things, is always have a contingency plan when you're starting your business on the Navajo Nation.
So the last question I have for both of you, I think, you know, a lot of people have in just listening to these stories of perseverance, is both of you clearly are still choosing to operate on Navajo. So why do you make that conscious decision when it's so much easier for both of you to run your business, say, in Winslow or Gallup? Candace, I'll go to you first.
I know people are like, why do you do this every day? And I mean, I am stubbornly stuck on Navajo, and I won't go anywhere else. I can't imagine living anywhere else at this point. I've been living, I grew up on the Navajo reservation. I lived there until I was 12 years old. My first language was Navajo. I went to kindergarten speaking Navajo, didn't know any English. So it was always my intention to move back to Navajo. And I moved back there 2 years ago. And my background is in broadband policy and nonprofit, Native nonprofits. So I went back with the intention, like I wanted to be part of the nation building process. And also I really wanted, and just being in the whole process of running a business and having a business, I could see what that could do for a community. Part of some little background about me is that I used to own a bar / liquor store when I lived in Costa Rica in 2008, I believe. And that's really what started the bug for me, was like, wow, I really, really like doing this. I can't believe all this money is mine, and I can work as much as I want. I can work as little as I want, but most of the time I was working a lot, as you know. So, but that really, and I saw what it did for the community there. And, you know, just by hiring security, by hiring people to run my errands for me, you just saw the money that goes back in the community. And so I see that now today with Navajo, like you know, with the yard sales, with the food sales, all that stuff funnels back. I hope it does for the most part. So a big part of opening a business was like a very specific intention to support the economic growth on Navajo. And that was like what I wanted to bring back. And I do that by contracting Native American small businesses. And I read somewhere that like 65% of the money that is made off the reservation leaves the reservation. And it goes down to the border towns. And then also I wanted my tax money to go strictly to Navajo. I pay back 6% of whatever I make back to Navajo. And I believe I saw this in a presentation that Arizona, although Navajo pays tax to the state of Arizona, Arizona does not give that money back to the Navajo Nation. So that's also something that I didn't agree with. And I was like, you know what, I'm not going to give my tax money to Arizona. I'm going to give it to Navajo, and maybe hopefully that'll go back to schools, to roads. You know, that's my own optimism, is that it goes back to the nation, and it means that whatever I work for goes back and go back, you know, maybe it'll help the DED put all their applications online, you know, something, it goes back to something. So, and it is our policy to hire small business or event services because it benefits everybody. Even like, you know, veteran-owned, women-owned businesses, I make a very specific intention to hire people like Sign Vision, which is a women-owned, tribally owned print shop. So they do a lot of our signs. Another one is like Pax Harvey Consulting, who does a lot of our emceeing. So, and he's veteran-owned, Native American, Navajo-owned business. So I really want to support the Navajo economy by doing that. So it's very intentional in what I'm doing.
Thank you, Candace. And Vernon, what about you? Why do you persist on Navajo? And you could easily go run and Gallup.
Yeah, I agree. So staying on Navajo, I guess I was born and raised here, and I guess don't want to leave just yet. And I think there's a lot of investment from everybody as professionals to come back and help our communities. So for myself in 2011, my idea started small. Of course, back then I was just an IT technician. I worked for the Department of Health for the Navajo Nation. And then at that time, I noticed all of the IT consulting and everything else around procurement for equipment was always leaving the Navajo Nation, going out to outside businesses. Also became frustrated at the time because when contracts would be awarded, the consultants would come in, and I would hear horror stories from a lot of the different Navajo Nation departments of how these consultants would get paid. They would start the job and they would never finish. And then so in 2014, I had that in mind, and I registered my business with the federal government. I got my EIN number. It just sat there, and I didn't do anything with it for all those years from 2014 up until 2018. But I remember going to the Gallup SBA and just getting a book and keeping those questions on how to start a business in that folder. And I would always come back to those documents, and I would answer the questions, not all at once, but one at a time. So in 2018, I climbed the ladder with the Navajo Nation. I became a computer operations manager, pretty much an IT director, and things didn't change. Things were always the same. Even as you moved up the ladder, you always still noticed how consultants would come in and they would provide these different services. And one of the things I noticed is as a IT manager, I would provide the same services as those consultants, and I would be getting paid $20 an hour, where, well, I've seen contracts go out for $240 an hour for the same sort of services that I was providing for my department at that time. So because of that big discretion in how much they were making, I thought, well, why can't I, as a Navajo, doing those same services, be able to provide those same services to the Navajo people, or to my people? So that's what kind of got the ball rolling for me. So at the time in about April 2019, I want to give a shout out to Department of Economic Development. I won their business contest, and they had a contest in Flagstaff, and I was able to get some startup funding from that contest. And it kind of legitimized my idea of how we lack these services, especially around information, or not even just information technology, but technology in general on the Navajo Nation. How most of our IT pros are leaving, they don't come back. They have jobs with Google, with Intel, and I figured, well, I can probably make that connection here on the Navajo Nation. So based on that, I decided to keep my business on the Navajo Nation, and for now, my target market is the Navajo Nation chapter houses, and then priority 3 would probably be federal, state, and other tribal entities. Thank you.
Thank you, Vernon. And you just set up the segue for me to talk about this introduction of technology on Navajo Nation, because clearly a lot of these issues arise from the fact that everything has to be done in person in Window Rock, or has to be snail mailed into Window Rock, and that just elongates the process because if something is wrong, it has to be snail mailed back and back and back and back. So we also have, we're very fortunate to have from Business Regulatory today, Mr. Albert Wanika and Mr. Ryan Holgate on the call today. And so I wanted to give these two fabulous individuals a chance to respond and a chance to give their thoughts on some of the short and long-term recommendations that we stepped through. So Mr. Holgate or Mr. Wanika, welcome, and I'm going to hand it over to you to give some of your initial thoughts.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is Ryan Holgate. I'm not sure if you can hear my other colleague, Alvin Onika, but in terms of the business regulatory and hearing some of the trials and tribulations that these business owners have been going through, I've been with the business regulatory department for a little over a year now. And I do remember when Vernon came in for the first time. I was probably about a month on the job when Vernon came in to register his business. So I've been here for about a little over a year. And in terms of talking about the process of registering a business, that's what I mainly focus on. Alvin deals with a lot of the certification side. It is a challenge. I see that. Everything that is done through the business regulatory is done with paper. Everything you need to fill out is done with paper. Nothing is online. You can't submit any applications or anything certification online. Everything does have to be either mailed in or it needs to be turned in person. So with that said, I'll hand it over to Alvin. I'm not sure if he's online, and maybe he can sort of talk about more on the certification side of that.
Hello, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay, thank you. Good afternoon. Share Alvin and share. And share the question. What's his team? I another. That's it. So that's why I'm the Navajo man. I appreciate the story that you're telling me. I'm the department director for BRD. I've been in this position past 6 months. I heard some of your stories to what you've been telling us, and I can emphasize with you. It is a hindrance, the paperwork that Ryan said, paperwork that we have to deal with. But we're with Mr. J.P. Williams, we are in the process of trying to get all the applications, whether it be no certification or Navajo corporation documentation. We're trying to do that online. Right now, we've got the fill-in for the applications. You still have to send it in, but we're still taking scanned copies over through the email, and we're trying to process as best as we can. The reason, for certification here is mostly the procurement clearances. And the longest one we have is the tax commission. I think they're being overwhelmed as well too. So it needs to get something out from them. And to expedite the process, we've gotten rid of some of the requirements for certification. That's for the Navajo business certification. Because there's the financial statement, that's no longer required. We got rid of the organizational part. We got rid of the business plan, but we still ask for CIB, a listing of past projects you've done with the Navajo Nation for the future. So, a little description of the business with the duties and responsibilities of the owners. That's what we ask for, a loan application. I think that for that is we've asked a question. We asked if you're a veteran. If you're a veteran, have to raise any benefit veterans affairs. We won't do that anymore.
if you have a business site lease. If you don't have a business site lease, we don't have to register this time to control the losses to see if you're up to date on your payments. If you have loan with credit services or with the BIDF here, if you don't have those, if you have checked no on those, we won't. The most we will have to do the tax. Everybody has to be registered with that. There's no ands, ifs, or buts about that. Another thing that Brian's documents too will be online, which they should be filled in soon, hopefully. We do establish a business license, the corporation and the preference. That hopefully should be online sometime soon. You can fill those out online. Another thing we're looking at too is getting payments done online as well too. Those things are all coming down the line. That's the goal of the Williams administration. We do with some of the funding that we're getting through the CARES Act. We're looking forward to getting new equipment here to make it possible. So we're working on that. Side with the story that you're telling, and I appreciate you still sticking here with us. Still stay on the reservation. We all need the jobs here. We all need the type of services that you provide. And we do our best here to get contracts like Mr. Livingston with through the Navajo Nation, the other businesses that are certified with us. We do our best to enforce the law. But there are times that we can't that doesn't work out because of, I don't know, maybe registration, licensing, things that comes into play. But we're here to help. We're trying not to be hindrance. We're trying to get over it. I understand the application for registration with the corporation was here for 6 months. That was really our fault. The thing that used to take care of that retired, and we didn't have anybody in that position for almost a year. So, and thanks to Ryan, he came on a year ago. He did thanks a lot. He's caught up in the workload. There's still a lot more to go. But like I said, we're here to help. We're open to suggestions. And if there's any changes, the ones that we made now, we don't have oversight authority. We don't need that authority to do these changes. But some of the funds for the corporation will have to go before our oversight committee and eventually to the council for changes. And that will, of course, will take some time. But we're open to suggestions, and we have an open ear, and we appreciate our opportunity to express our thoughts there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Winika. Your connectivity was a little bit in and out throughout that, but what I heard you say, or a lot of it was really important, unfortunately, but I definitely heard you say that scanning and emailing in documents was an acceptable way of submitting forms these days. So that's wonderful to hear. And I also heard you say that DED and Business Regulatory are actively working on transitioning systems online, and that some of the Navajo Nation CARES funding will play a role in financing some of this transition online. I also heard you say that, I heard you use the word overwhelmed in regards to staff in response to registrations and licensing. And so a follow-up question that I have for you and Mr. Holgate is, what are, besides this idea of transitioning online and the recommendations that Causal Design and Change Labs have on the screen here, is what other supports do you guys think is needed to improve these processes? Like, could it be more staffing or a transparency around the processes? I'd love to hear your candid thoughts on support for business regulatory.
Well, for business regulatory, we need a little bit more administrative assistance. Right now, we only have one office specialist who logs and documents all the applications, and she's overwhelmed. She's behind on her work as well. And then another person maybe to help Brian out with the corporation documents. And right now, too, another issue that we have problems with to affect the economy is the weights and measures. Both our weights and measure inspectors are no longer here with us. So that's something we're working on right now, to get them back out there to do the scales and the field dispensers throughout the Navajo Nation. But those are the underlying issues that we have here: lack of support, initiative-wise staffing, and we hope to have like I said, the CARES funding might able to help us with that to some extent. And you have any ideas, Ryan?
Yeah, I'll sort of add on to what Alvin was saying. For the corporation side, for the Corporation Act and the Limited Liability Act, and for all businesses who want to register on the Navajo Nation, all that applications, documents, they all go through my office. I'm the one that reviews them, and I'm the one that makes sure everything's filed correctly, whether you are filed with the state or just with the Navajo Nation, whether you fill out the right application. So all of that and paperwork goes through my office, and like Alvin said, unfortunately, it all is just paper. And unfortunately, within also what's been going on within the last few months with the office being shut down, I was only going into the office maybe once a week, maybe once every 2 weeks, and mail wasn't coming in regularly. So we kind of got backed up within these past few months, but we are catching up now. And we're really, like Alvin said, we do face a lot of challenges with our office. There's only one of me to approve and review all applications that come in through the Navajo Nation, and we're really trying to make sure that we turn around these applications and these registrations within a timely manner, and get them back to the business owners.
Thank you, Mr. Holgate and Mr. Wanika, for being on this call. I was always a little bit worried because I do know that there's a lot of stories out there, and we really do appreciate you guys for joining. If you're able to stay on the line for another 15 minutes, we did promise our participants the opportunity to ask some questions or to share their own stories. I see that there's already some questions coming through on the chat window. Given the time constraint, we probably only have time for 2 or 3 questions or stories. I did want to quickly address one question that came up around CARES money and Navajo small businesses. And I feel fairly certain this is public information because it's going through council, and because JT Willie, the division director for economic development, has publicly circulated this PDF, but he has requested 60 million in CARES funding for small business forgivable loans between $5,000 to $60,000 for Navajo small businesses. And the details on that, I'm assuming will be coming out shortly, but I know there was some questions going through the chat window about CARES money directly for Navajo-owned businesses. So with that, I wanted to open it up for questions from this group, and I'll do my best to help with this because I suspect that there might be some overlap of questions and talking here.
Hey everybody, this is Nick Smith here in Shiprock. I was part of Hannah's project there, so I was laughing because as you were showing that, you're like, Nick hasn't done anything. Nick hasn't produced. I'm like, no, I'm working. So just want to say that's cool that you have me in there as an example, because it is tough here. And just wanted to say to all the fellow entrepreneurs out there that during this time right now, like the Navajo Nation's getting ready to spend a lot of money in different areas. So we need to figure out if our business wasn't or isn't part of these plans that they're trying to spend money towards these different avenues. You should try to maybe think about getting in there, because like there's no events going on, like really trying to do outside events for one of the businesses, but really there's nothing. So we're looking at maybe transport or some kind of medical thing where we supply. I mean, even if you're the middleman, just get in there and get involved and try to capture some of that. I mean, we're even talking about just bypassing going to Kirtland, because we can do it in a day, get a business license, get someplace where we partner up with another shop and just have a piece of place where we can send the mail. Good on you for Vernon. That was cool with kind of capturing that, like you see the need for it, and then you jump at it, because we need to capture this. We see them spending so much and it's going off of the reservation. So we need to try to capture as much as we can. And really cool shirt. I like the gold. I like that gold and black shirt. And I see Summer wearing the same kind of shirt. So I'm not sure if that's hers, but I really like that. That's cool. And that's kind of all I had to say was just keep grinding and just kind of look at different opportunities because they're all out there. Working in the shop here, it's slow, but we're still trying to go at it, trying to find different avenues. Right now, nixprintshop.com, where we got specialized t-shirts, we're just printing for one brand right now and trying to go hard at it. So I mean, even decals and stuff like this. So stay at it, keep on. And thank you guys for joining us, all the officials out there. And this is what it's all about. Change labs, change, and you hear everybody's scenarios and try to fix it and make streamline. And Candice, that was a crazy story of all you went through. I mean, wow. It almost seems like I was telling my wife, you got to be, because she just jumped on Dene College, like Navajo's talking a different, where we're like, you got to be mean to be accepted almost. You got to kind of like give it back really quick. And they're like, okay, well, we're on the same level, we're working. It's an unspoken thing, but yeah, that's how we communicate in a weird way. All right, you guys have a good one. I got to get out of here.
Go ahead, Nick. Thank you. This is a lotusandlane.com shirt for anybody else who loves my black and gold. Question here from Kim Kanuho and Mr. Winika, Mr. Holgate, if you're still on the line. I'm not sure if this is a question for you or if it might be a question for JT Willie or somebody else on his team. But the question is, how are Navajo certified businesses prioritized and regulated? Is that something you could shed a light on?
For the priority guys, excuse me, hold on. It's based on the ownership. Okay, at least 51% Navajo-owned would be priority 2. If it's 100% Navajo-owned, it'd be a priority 1. So we'll just look at the percentage of the ownership. 100% is priority 1. Anything less than that is priority 2, down to 51%. We don't regulate them. What we try to get them get contract with the Navajo Nation, and that's all we do. We don't regulate them. That's how we prioritize them.
Yeah, I'll add on to that. I don't know if you guys can really, hear Alvin. I know it's kind of difficult, but they do look at the ownership to reiterate what he said. Priority 1 is 100% Navajo-owned. Priority 2 is 51% Navajo-owned. And like he also said that it's not regulated. It's not, when you submit your certifications, you just have to show ownership within your business on to go towards the certification process.
So just to add to that, this is Vernon again. So priority 1, priority 2 is a really good tool right now, especially with this CARES Act funding that's going to be released. But what priority 1 gives my business advantage of is when I find contracts on NNOOC's NNOOC.org's website, and I find a contract that I can bid on, I'll put a proposal together, and on the outside envelope, as I'm submitting my proposal, I'll put my priority 1 vendor number on this document, and I'll submit it in. So as a priority 1, as the buyer is opening up these different proposals, if your priority 1 number is listed on that proposal, they'll review it. If you're within their budget allowance, they will not even consider opening up the priority 2 or the other contracts that are being proposed as well. And that's the advantage of being priority 1. So if you're priority 2 as well, and there's no other priority vendors that are submitting proposals, you'll get that advantage where they won't even consider the other contracts. They just put them to the side and say, well, we got a priority 1 vendor here. But I guess just something to think about too is one of the questions that I seen right before that was, how about Navajo that owns a state registered businesses that is not priority with the Navajo Nation? And I was trying to think, well, what if we create a priority 3 where they can attach their CIB number to these proposals. That way they have the advantage as a Navajo or even being a tribal-owned business, so we can get a lot of these contracts fulfilled on the Navajo Nation. But that was just something I was thinking about. But that's how the Navajo one and the priority one affects the way I do business with contracts on the Navajo Nation. Thank you.
Thank you, Vernon. Are there any other questions from this audience for our speakers?
Hey, Heather, I had something to add to the last part of what Vernon was saying. And I'm not even sure if this is something, this is kind of like insider information also. And I don't think it's something that is talked about a lot, is that part of the process. Now, when I was talking with people at the DED office, they were telling me the part of the process that takes so long is that a lot of outside entities that are not Navajo owned apply for these priority one. So like one example that they gave me was a construction company, a big one might come in, they might find a Navajo to run this business with them. And they'll go into the Navajo DED office with a Navajo person and saying, yeah, they own 51%, but it might have just been a friend or something. And then they go in there with a priority one certification. And then they get these big, construction contracts for, for road building or airport building, all the stuff. They get these big contracts, but then the Navajo person that is part on that paperwork never goes back and files it because there weren't really a person that owned the business anyway. They were just someone to get them to the door they were just like basically a Navajo body, CIB, to get them a priority one certification so that company could get that contract first. So that was another reason, because I even asked when I was in the office, I was like, why does this take so long? This is insane. And the lady told me, like, listen, this is what happens. And that's why we, prefer people to come in so that we know what's going on. And we would flag any application that tried to, get their foot in the door that way.
Are there any other questions for our guests? We'll probably have time for one question or a story if somebody wants to share a story.
I guess I could add a little something. I think there was a fourth question about what do you think as a business owner that can support positive changes to the registration and certification process for us Navajo businesses? So for myself, providing a plan for rural addressing, such as using plus codes where we can attach a number to our house and be able to view housing locations online rather than having to actually use a provided by USPS. Also, affordable and highly available business spaces across the Navajo Nation would be a big thing for small businesses. Right now, I'm on 3 waiting lists. One at the flea market in Winter Rock. I'm like 24. I'm on a waiting list with Quality Inn in St. Michael's. I think I'm number 2, but the building hasn't even been built yet. And at Navajo shopping centers, I think I'm number 8 or number 9 on their waiting list for a small business in the Winter Rock area. Also, high-speed, low-costing internet. Everybody has that issue on the Navajo Nation, but for us to have that as an advantage, I think a lot of these small jewelry businesses would definitely kick up the economy by being able to provide their services. And then an economic stability plan from economic development. I don't think we've seen one, but something that's a reality, not built on a hypothesis, and something that takes into account what's really going on in the Navajo Nation, just kind of like what the information that Change Lab has provided in their presentation. And then the last would just be a recommendation, which would be a priority 3 for the CARES Act as an executive order from the president, where we can attach our CIB numbers to these contracts that are going to be coming out in the near future. So that was just something I wanted to add in there. Thank you.
Thank you, Vernon. And I'm hastily trying to type some answers to some questions that are coming up in the chat window as well. So we've reached our time limit for today. I do want to stick to the 90 minutes that we had promised. But before we head out, I wanted to let our audience know a few things. One, this is being recorded, so we'll post this up on our YouTube and post a link to you all so that you have access to it. Two, again, this is the first in a 4-part series that Change Labs will be hosting over the next 4 weeks. So next Tuesday, we're gonna switch gears and talk about the big issue of land and the process, the business site leasing process, construction permits, and access to electricity for new businesses. And this is actually where the Navajo Nation, according to our research, ranks among the worst in the world in terms of time and number of steps and processes. So it will be a meaty discussion next week that will be moderated by Ms. Charlene Begay-Platero from Navajo Nation Project Development. And we'll be featuring Henry Silentman from the Shiprock RBDO, Kim Kanuho from Fourth World Design Group, who's also on this call, and Sherilyn Yazzie from Coffee Pot Farms. So please do register for that if you're interested in attending. You can register for all Change Labs events at nativestartup.org/events. And we also get lots of questions just around what can we do to support Native businesses right now, because a lot of these issues that we're discussing in this series and that we highlight in the research are really big, complex challenges, and it's hard for an individual to feel like, well, what can I do to affect this process? So we always suggest 2 things. Well, one is a little bit, you know, what's the word? Personal right now for Change Labs, but we're running a petition right now. If you go to nativestartup.org/BIA cleanup, many of you on the res maybe have seen some of the abandoned or contaminated buildings, particularly old federal BIA buildings around the reservation. And a lot of them, like the ones in Tuba City, occupy prime real estate in town. And why couldn't these buildings be released to the community? Step 1 in that process, though, is that federal buildings can't be released unless they're cleaned up. We need to get congressional money to get those BIA buildings cleaned up. So Change Labs is circulating a petition to our local congressional leaders to get these BIA buildings cleaned up so that they can start the process of releasing them back to the community, ideally for small business owners. And if you want to support that petition, please go to nativestartup.org/BIA cleanup. And the second thing, to Candace's point, Candace does everything in her power to support other local Navajo businesses by contracting them for her event planning services, Navajo caterers, Navajo entertainment. And if you want to find local Native-owned businesses in your community, Change Labs has put together a database called resrising.org. And at the moment, we have over 500 Native-owned businesses on the app and the website, in case you want to be able to find a Native business in your community. I want to issue a final thank you to our speakers for joining us for today. And thank you all for attending. We'll be sure to put this webinar up online shortly. And yeah, I hope to see you all next Tuesday.